1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 7. This is Paul's letter to Timothy with some important instructions, as we'll see in these verses here. As I urged you when I went to Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus, so that you may command certain people not to teach false doctrines any longer, or to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. Such things promote controversial speculations rather than advancing God's work, which is by faith. Here are the first couple verses of 1 Timothy. Let's get into it. So, important things to be paying attention to. As I urged you when I went into Macedonia. When gives us just a simple time marker for the events taking place in this letter, or at least being time marker for what is being referenced in this letter. So as I urged you, so this is something that Paul has already given to Timothy. When I went into Macedonia, remember, is just Greece. Ephesus is in Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. So Paul at some point went into Greece. He went into Macedonia. This could be when he did this in Acts chapter 20. This could be some other time. We don't know exactly when this reference is being made. But at that time, Paul gave instructions to Timothy. He said to Timothy, stay there in Ephesus, right? And immediately you should ask yourself why. Why would Paul give up a companion? Why would he not have Timothy come with him and instead stay there in Ephesus? And the answer is, of course, given in the very next words. So that, right? This gives us our reason for for Timothy's staying on in Ephesus. So that you may command certain people. Now, we don't know who the certain people are. He's going to throw out some names in the book of 1 Timothy. But there are certain people there not to teach false doctrines any longer. That's the command. Do not teach false doctrines any longer. Interestingly, when Paul says goodbye to the Ephesian elders, he says that there will come up from among your own wolves, right? And maybe it's some of those people. We don't really know. But we do know that there's somebody in Ephesus, or some people in Ephesus, who are presenting false doctrines. And that it's actually Timothy's job to silence these people. Now, they're teaching false doctrines. Here's the other thing they're doing. Or to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. So on the one side, you have the actual presenting of false doctrines. Just your teaching as true things that are false. But the other side of this is a devotion to. They devote themselves to myths. And in Judaism, there were many, 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 many myths. And endless genealogies. Constantly chasing back lines of people and figuring out what's trying to go on. And it's basically kind of looking at Scripture and not looking at the obvious meaning of a text and always trying to uncover some kind of hidden thing in the tradition or in the endless genealogies. And there is no reason that anyone should be devoted to this. We should be devoted to the clear teaching of Scripture. Now, inevitably, as you study the clear teaching of Scripture, you will go down rabbit trails. You will wonder about, who are the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6. There are going to be questions, certainly, and good questions about really obscure things in Scripture. However, devotion to these things is not wise. We need to be focused on the clear teaching of Scripture. Okay. Why? So this is the command. The first part is the command. The command. And now in this next one, he is going to give the reason. And that reason is really going to come in two parts. First, the negative reason, and then the positive reason. So here we go. Negative reason and positive reason. All right. Such things promote controversial speculations rather, so this is our negative reason. The controversial speculation, that's the negative here, rather than advancing God's work. And that's the positive, rather than advancing God's work, which is by faith. So the controversial speculation, speculative stuff here, there's no way to know these things. There's no way to put an answer down that's hard and fast. But nevertheless, people can have controversy, right? Just because something isn't able to be nailed down concretely doesn't mean we can't have controversy over it. And that was the same then. And the devotion to these things promotes that controversial speculation. So there's no edifying goodness that comes out of these things, or very little, and it certainly doesn't outweigh the controversial speculation that stems from it. That it does that rather than, here's the positive reason, advancing God's work, which is by faith. So faith here is being given in opposition to the endless studying and devotion to these kind of pointless things. Now, Paul says a really cool thing next. He says, the goal of this command is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Now, what you have to understand about this word command, and this is kind of hard, because when you see it this way, it's easy to kind of speculate on what this means. He's used the word command up here. He's going to use the word law down here. But the word for command here is almost more like a charge. The goal of this charge is love. So where is this charge given? Where does this charge come from? And you have one of two options here. One charge that Paul could be referencing is back to the very beginning. The charge to Timothy to stay there in Ephesus. The other possibility, so that's option number one. Option number two is simply the gospel charge itself. That the gospel is a mission and a commission to go and give the gospel to the ends of the earth, to spread the love of God. So it could be either one of these, and it really doesn't matter which, because both are true, right? Even if Paul is referring to this charge over here, it's not that we don't have the gospel charge. And even if Paul's referring to the gospel charge, it's not also that Timothy has this charge to go to the Ephesians. So both are true, although it's hard to know exactly which one Paul has in mind here. But let's look at what comes next, because I think that leans us more towards this gospel one. That's my opinion. The goal of the command is love, right? And then he unpacks love. He says that love comes. I'm going to write these arrows in blue because this word which reminds us that love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. So we're advancing God's work, which is by faith. That's a big gospel. This is a big gospel kind of centered idea. Pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith. I would also put those in the gospel basket. So I'm going to put my money here on number 2, that the goal of this command is just the gospel as it's been given to the church. And the goal of that command is love, obviously, right? That's the highest and greatest thing that we can pursue. And love must come from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. Genuine, sincere faith in God, a good and clean conscience, a pure heart that loves what is right. That needs to be the source of love. That is our charge. And now, we're also understanding that this is all in opposition to teaching people false doctrines and devoting ourselves to myth and endless genealogies. That's not going to come from a pure gospel by faith motivation. Okay, now he gives the negative example again. Negative example. Sorry, it's not a negative reason, it's a negative example. Some have departed from these and have turned to meaningless talk, right? So the controversial speculation, the false doctrine, the devotion to myths, People have departed from these, right? So we ask the question, what is these? And these obviously is a reference back to sincere faith, back to good conscience, back to a pure heart, back to love, back to the gospel. They've departed from what is clear, the obvious teaching of Scripture, the clear teaching of Scripture, and have turned to meaningless talk. And we just have to watch out for this. This is kind of a common thing in the church. It should not be the case, but it absolutely happens. They want to be teachers of the law, but they do not know what they are talking about or what they so confidently affirm. I want to point out something real quick before we finish this out. It's sometimes common today in the church to meet people who get devoted to myths and endless genealogy. I think that's going to happen forever. But I also want to point out that that's not the only place where you're going to see people wasting their breath and getting overly interested in just one given thing and missing the clear teaching of Scripture. And that would be, I believe, in the political arena, a place where a lot of meaningless talk takes place, a place where lots of controversial speculation gets going, and a place where ultimately the command to preach the gospel from a pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith, to live out love gets lost. And what happens is you get these voices, right? These people who have gotten so involved in one particular kind of fringe topic, if you will. And nevertheless, they think that they've got the answers. They think that they've got the thing that everybody else needs to know. They want to be teachers of the law. It is inevitable that these people are going to end up trying to throw Scripture at you and tell you what it means. But, here's the thing. They don't know what they're talking about or what they so confidently affirm. And the reason they don't know what they're talking about or what they so confidently affirm is because, again, they've gotten away from the clear teaching of Scripture. They're not looking at what's obvious in Scripture. They're not looking at what's clear in the Scripture. They've devoted themselves to the fringe things. And anyone who's really devoted themselves to the fringe things, who's not really reading Scripture for what it is, and in that space, even if they want to be a teacher of the law, and even if they sound convincing as a teacher, they really don't know what they're talking about. They really don't know what they're so confidently affirming. Scripture, strong, good, true, biblical doctrine, is the guide for us, and it's going to keep us from going and giving undue attention to the rabbit trails of the Christian faith. If it's not all about love, stemming from a pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith, it's completely misguided. So just hope you see that beautifully in this text and that you're able to apply that in your own life. When it came to the first century, Timothy could go to Ephesus and command certain people not to teach doctrines any longer. Today, all you have to do is have a YouTube channel to have a special the ability to speak into many people's lives. So what you have to remember here is where before the pastors of the church had a strong responsibility to tell you who not to listen to, nowadays you're going to have to do that yourselves. So as you think about what Paul told Timothy to do in Ephesus, realize that you have to do that in your own life. No one can do it for you. God bless.